Good evening. It's Tuesday. This feels weird.
That's what people are saying in the comments.
And everything, like on a Tuesday. This is unheard of. Today is very exciting, everybody. Thank you so much for coming down because we have a guest. Round of applause for the wonderful Michael Jones, who is here to talk to us about the Black Prince. Now, this could be a potential history crust situation, which means it could get a little bit creepy. So to be on the safe side and to allow me to apologise to Michael in advance, disclaimer, keep it low on the usual things.
Okay. Hello. Welcome to History After Dark. It's on 8:15 of the evening, and we are about to do the things. We call it History After Dark for a variety of reasons. Chief amongst them is this is a place where we let our freak flags fly, where we indulge in our adoration of four-letter expletives, filth, smut, innuendo, innuendo. With that being said, if you're in an open plan office with a judgmental boss, put a headphone in. If you are in a car, a skip, a submarine with a small child, we call this child Timmy. Show us your mugs. Get your mugs out. All the lads. There we are. Timmy is a problem. Timmy is the sort of child that his one depraved thing, just the one time, takes it into school with him, locked away in his mind palace, and repeats it in front of his teacher, who in my head is Miss Honey. Now, Miss Honey, pure as the driven, she does not watch this kind of filth. So she doesn't know the first cardinal rule of History After Dark, which is, if you don't know what it means, don't Google it. It's not for you. So she Googles it, and now she's in the fetal position in the corner, rocking back and forth, non-verbal. Not ideal for a reception primary school teacher. You're called up to school. Why does Timmy know this? He's only 5. And you've also now on the hook for her therapy to get her upright, verbal, and not weeping. No one needs that. Put a headphone in. All that being said, I think it's fairly obvious what might occur tonight. We have got a guest, which could either mean we're going to be in our best behaviour or we might start showing off. Who knows?
We're going to start showing off yet.
Come into these comments or our individual comments and say anything along the lines of, I very much enjoy the history, but must you swear? It's very rude and I don't like it. First of all, yes, I must swear. We must all swear because you know what? It reduces your blood pressure and it's really good for your health. In fact, you're less prone to heart attacks and strokes. So if you're telling me not to swear, why do you want me dead, you murderer?
True.
So, we know what you want to do. You want us to pin that comment so people will come in there and they will humiliate you publicly because that's your kink, right? Now, I won't kink shame you. Others might. But kink without consent is not okay. My dear friend Tiffany, in the Brighton basement with the white clean walls and the white clean clothing will do unspeakable things to you with a set of nipple clamps and a car battery. But you've got to pay for the privilege. She's got white clean clothes to buy. So, kink without consent, not okay. Dear God, I hope you're all adults after what I've just said there. This, however, will never be a drinking game. You can do what you like, but we won't approve that. This is not medical nor legal advice. Please do not sue. This is History After Dark. Let's talk about the Black Prince.
Yay! Michael, that was actually quite tame compared to a couple of the ones we've had.
I know a little bit.
I did start showing.
Good stuff, though. Good stuff. Yeah.
I had to rein it back. It was getting to the point where I was like, this is now becoming a snuff movie.
Oh my God, Katrina!
I declined it, fine.
Oh, hang on. You didn't do the bit about us being live and the yeeting.
Oh, yeah, well, that's actually... There is a possibility, of course. You can always watch it. We are live currently, friends. If you want, you can watch the playback if you haven't got a headphone. It has been a while. There was one occasion where we did say that it was so depraved we had to yeet that footage into the sun. It has been a while, which means one of 3 things. 1, we've got better. 2, we're due something else. More likely, it's war. We're all showing up. 3rd, and I think perhaps most likely, is that us ladies have now spent so much time together that we have the level of depravity has sunk so far. The bar is, in fact, in hell, and we don't know what's illegal anymore. So buckle up, buttercups. It's going to be a wild ride.
Down there. At least it's warm down there. Anyway, after all of that, everyone take a deep breath. I've come here for a nice quiet evening. So yes, Michael, thank you so much for coming down. You're smiling at the moment. I hope you can still come round from now.
I'm smiling, and then I'll be out.
Yes, we really, really appreciate you coming down to talk to us today. We're very excited. We do love having our guests, and you are here today to talk to us about myths surrounding the Black Prince. So we may interject with questions, but essentially the floor is yours. To tell us a little bit about you. Oh no, words are hard.
A little bit about who you are and what brings you to the Black Prince.
Thank you very much. What she said.
Yeah, well, so thank you, all of you, for having me on your show. And I'll try and follow that great intro.
Please don't.
Yeah, I am here. I'm very protective of you. It's okay. I'm here to talk about the Black Prince. So who am I? I'm a military historian, and I did my thesis and worked on the medieval period. The Black Prince I've done a biography of. So if you're fascinated by the Black Prince, you can go and read that. I'm also giving a talk on him, and there's a history festival at Southwark. So that's not this coming weekend, the weekend after. And I'm kicking it off. So that's Friday the 18th of July. So if this whets your appetite for anything from nipple clamps to the Black Prince, Southwark Cathedral is the place you need to go.
I'm not sure Southwark Cathedral.
Nipple clamps in the cathedral. That's
the Bishop of Southwark a while back did get completely drunk at a reception in the Irish embassy. And on the way home, he broke into a couple's car and started flinging their kids' toys, out the window. And when they challenged him, he said, "I am the Bishop of Southwark. This is what I do." So I think Southwark Cathedral covers everything.
It's very inclusive in Southwark Cathedral.
I think it's a very inclusive venue.
That's fabulous. That's what we like to hear.
So,
wow.
Yeah. So the Black Prince is, from a medieval point of view, is a topic to die for. And I think the first thing we need to say is he was never called the Black Prince in his lifetime. And this nickname, which was really popularized more than 100 years after his death, kind of sets up the myth thing, because once you've got someone called the Black Prince, you're teed up for some kind of bad thing to happen. It's a bit like you go and see a movie called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you don't think these nice teenagers have met some rather unusual locals and they're all going to go off and have a nice picnic together. You're primed in a way to fear the worst. And I'm afraid with this nickname that we now all use, the Black Prince, we are primed for Atrocity, the fallen hero, and the works. So the first thing to emphasize, as you've, I think, said when you're advertising the talk, in his lifetime, he was the oldest son of Edward III, a really great king, and his wife Philippa of Hainaut. And he was called Edward of Woodstock. He was born in Woodstock, and he was the oldest of 5 surviving sons, a lot of daughters as well. But he became very, very famous. A lot of expectation was put on his shoulders. I'm gonna rush through. Of course, you interrupt, ask questions whenever you like. But at the age of 16, he was introduced to battle at Crécy, where I don't think President Macron will be talking about that battle on his state visit, because we kicked French arse thoroughly. And
Yes.
Tough love. Edward III put his son in the vanguard position, made him a target for the French, and the French came very close to killing him. They knocked him out, concussed him, they took the standard, and someone grabbed it back, and the prince picked himself up and carried on fighting. There's a famous story told by Jean Froissart. Now, Froissart is one of our main characters because he is going to create a lot of myths about Black Prince, which I'm going to try and blow out the water later on. he's a chronicler who brings the 100 Years' War, the 14th century phase of the 100 Years' War to life, but he also is quite happy to make things up. So we'll get to know him a bit later on. I've also mentioned the 100 Years' War. This is it lasted more than 100 years. The 14th century phase is basically Edward III claiming the crown of France in his own right via his mother. So we're taking war to France, and we're also saying we are rightful kings. So it's pretty powerful stuff. And Crécy is powerful because we bring the French king to battle and thump his army. So the Black Prince is very nearly killed. Famously, a messenger goes to Edward III, who was at a vantage point. Some say up a windmill. Not he hadn't run out of bread. It was a vantage point. And said, look, if you don't send reinforcements, your son will die. And famously, Edward said, let him win his spurs. So if we have parent issues now, this is tough love, 14th century style. I mean, it probably could have led to the prince having 20 years of unsuccessful therapy. It's nice to know that another chronicler tells us that after uttering this great statement, about a minute later, the king kind of thought, oh my God, what have I said? And sent 40 of his best knights. So he kind of did the first thing as a soundbite, I think, but then thought, oh, my son. But it was incredibly dramatic. Literally, the Black Prince was blooded in combat, and it made him very famous. So that's how his career kicks off. And then, I mean, the career trajectory is extraordinary. In 1348, he and his father create an amazing order of chivalry, the Order of the Garter, quite unique in a number of ways. It's unique in that it was created in the midst of the Black Death, an odd time, you might think, to create an order of chivalry. But this conjunction of death and chivalry was actually very powerful, because the crucial idea of the Order of the Garter was intercession for those souls. Here it's nice to be inclusive, French and English souls, so we might have killed them in battle, but we were going to pray for their souls. If you hadn't confessed your sins, you were stuck in purgatory. Not a good place to be. If you look at any medieval wall painting, your arse is being roasted by demons, you're being prodded. There's all sorts of
unpleasant ideas. Yeah.
I was playing to your gallery there, either for yourself or some of your acquaintances, because nipple clamps and electric shocks, I thought that's become a bit tame after a while. But purgatory was not fun, and if you weren't literate and you didn't understand much of the church service, you certainly understood purgatory. And the thing was, what soldiers and victims at the Black Death, no priest would come and hear your confession, because he'd get the plague as well. So what armies and Black Death victims had in common was dying horrifically and then realizing you're going to purgatory. Someone once, I was giving a talk, said, I don't really understand the concept of purgatory. I just said, go to Clapham Junction railway station in the rush hour. Then you'll completely understand purgatory. It's not a good place to be. And this order of chivalry is pulling people out of purgatory through the prayers of the knights. There are 26 of them. It's like two tournament teams. And the Black Prince and his father create this order of chivalry. So it's a remarkable thing. And one final fact I'd like to bookend, I've mentioned John Froissart, we'll get back to him. It's a very beautiful hottie called Joan of Kent, who will also come into our story later on, but she's going to come into it right now, because while this great order of chivalry was being created, Joan of Kent was actually, as a very attractive teenager, had been married to two different people at the same time. both of whom were in this chivalric order.
Oh.
So there was a little bit of frisson there. She was married to Sir Thomas Holland and also the Earl of Salisbury. Well, Sir Thomas Holland won out, but much later on, when Thomas Holland died, the Black Prince was asked by many people to intercede on their behalf, and he went off to Joan of Kent and said, well, these are all these petitions, but Joan, I love you most of all. And she kind of fainted with joy, and they got married. So later on, Joan of Kent, who's already creating quite a stir, will become the Black Prince's wife. And they, in the 1360s in particular, they are the 14th century power couple. So I'm just flagging that up for your delectation later, ladies. So far, so good. What have we got? A crunching victory against the French, founding the premier order of chivalry. But it's going to get better because the prince now goes to France. He goes to Gascony, a very nice place to go. In fact, if you Google Le Prince Noir, you'll end up being led to chateau with very fine wines called Le Prince Noir. So the French have kind of got over the Black Prince. They've incorporated him into their culture. But he has an independent command as lieutenant in Gascony. He leads a huge raid from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean in 1355. But a year later, and this is extraordinary achievement, another big raid. He's supposed to be supported by his dad and another aristocrat, but that doesn't work out. So all the French gang up on him, and he has an army of English and Gascons, and they rout the French despite being heavily outnumbered. And this time at Poitiers, they capture the French king. This is like going to Vegas and hitting the jackpot. And ultimately, after another campaign, it means the English can dictate very favorable terms, the Treaty of Bretigny, where for the only time in the 100 Years' War, we hold Aquitaine. Aquitaine is an enlarged version of Gascony. It's basically from Poitou right down to the Pyrenees. And we hold this outright. We don't have to bend the knee in homage, not in Black Lives Matter, but we don't have to bend the knee. We hold it outright. And Edward III is so grateful that he gives Aquitaine to his son. And the wording of this grant, sometimes grants, they just drone on and on and on. I mean, they're in Latin anyway, but they just drone. You can imagine that they're read out and everyone's asleep. Has this grant finished? No, there's 3 more pages of parchment. Bloody hell. Okay, wait, put the timer on and wake me up. But this grant is wonderful. I mean, it gets rid of all the formula, and the king says, this is the reward for the sweat and labor of you and your army on that hot summer campaign. I mean, rock and roll. I mean, this is the kind of grants I want to read. So at this point, now the prince has, he's got Aquitaine. He's now married to Joan of Kent, who I think he'd always loved. He was kind of holding back from marriage because he was thinking she might become available. He's in love. He's married to an extremely beautiful woman. He's beaten the French in battle, and he's ruling over Aquitaine. So it's the absolute summit of his achievement. And at this stage, Jean Froissart also came from Hainaut. This is an area of northern France and modern Belgium that Edward III's queen also came from. That was his entree into the English court. And at the beginning, because on many levels, the story of the Black Prince is a story of falling in love and falling out of love. How we fall in love with our celebrities and then hate them. Remember that 18-year-old girl who won the US Open tennis, Emma Raducanu. She was described as the most amazing thing in the history of British sport. How long did it take before the media were ripping her to shreds? A couple of months. And this is really, with the Black Prince, when he got to the summit of his fame, it was like the the vultures were already circling around, trying to find a way to demean or diminish him. John Froissart, at the time of the marriage and at the time when the prince was about to go over to France, was wowed by the prince himself, by the Princess of Wales, and by his court, and said that when they went on progress in Aquitaine, it was like a realm of magic had been brought to France. And if you imagine, it was a time of plague, the plague had come back, a time of war and plague. People wanted to be entranced. And the prince and his wife were amazing together. And if I can give you one example of that, Joan of Kent was a hottie. She knew how to dress in a very risque way. So she started a very amazing court fashion, which modeled itself on the mistresses, basically the whores who followed the routier, the free captains around, who showed a lot of their wares. And that the Princess of Wales had the class to know how much to do and where to stop. So you had a lot of bling, you had braids, you were showing off, and then a lot of cleavage would be on display, so low-cut blouses, but just at the borderline of getting really smutty, reined it in. So the reason for this is going to emerge because you have to use a little bit of imagination. But Froissart describes the banquet, and they've gone, they're traveling around the southwest of France receiving homage, which does sound very dull, but hopefully it won't be dull after you hear the story. They visit this incredible nobleman called Gaston Phoebus, Count of Foix. And Gaston Phoebus is like the lead singer of Led Zeppelin, Robert Plant. He has this mane of blonde hair, piercing blue eyes. He's incredibly sexy and struts around. I mean, he wasn't singing Whole Lot of Love with rock musicians behind him, but he was a whole lot of love. He was regaling the ladies with extraordinary stories at this banquet. I mean, he'd been reindeer hunting in the north. He'd gone on a northern crusade. And then to cap it all, at a time of truce between England and France, with about 40 knights who'd been riding back through France, and he'd heard that all the damsels, 40 damsels from the French court who'd been sent at a time of a peasant uprising, safety in Meaux, were actually not safe at all, because all these peasants diverted their route from Paris and thought, we'll basically sort of do our unpleasant acts on these poor women of the court. So they were shut up, about to be raped and pillaged, when Gaston Phoebus and his 40 knights came to the rescue. This is hardcore chivalry, rescuing damsels in distress. 40 knights on the bridge, guarding the fortress, and they kept killing peasants until the peasants thought, this isn't much fun, we're off. So by the time he's got back home, he's got stories to tell. So if you can imagine, the Black Prince very relaxed, Joan of Kent halfway down the table, Gaston Phoebus absolutely the center of attention. And what the Prince and Princess of Wales know is that Gaston Phoebus has a captive nobleman that the prince really needs to get released because he needs his help in governing Aquitaine. But Phoebus wants a huge ransom. So Princess of Wales says that, thank you for these wonderful stories. And since you're so good with damsels in distress, I'm sure you won't refuse if I ask you a favor. Well, Gaston Phoebus immediately kind of is a bit suspicious. So he kind of draws back, less relaxed, and says, what might that favor be? And then the princess says, well, you have a nobleman, a Jean Count of Armagnac, that my husband would like released. And it would be really chivalrous of you, she says craftily, inserting the chivalry, if you could reduce his ransom. And Gaston Phoebus goes, this is a private matter. No, like this. But Princess Rose is not put off at all. She's emboldened. So having leaned over to give him a fair view of her cleavage, she leans over a lot more. So Gaston Phoebus is looking right down her cleavage. At this point, Gaston Phoebus thinks, I better check what the prince is making of this. So he looks up the table, and the prince is beaming. And Fabius thought that those so-and-sos, they caught me in a pincer movement, and he moves from being very uptight. He just roars with laughter and knocks 10,000 gold coins off the ransom. And the Princess of Wales is cheeky enough to do it again. So 20,000 écus get knocked off the ransom. And then Black Prince, beaming at everyone, says, yeah, thank you so much for your generosity, but I do think you deserve some reward for your victory. And everyone loved it. Now, this anecdote to me is they had this incredible charisma. They were very beautiful, very well adorned. They had the bling. They loved jewelry, but they also had the class and the charisma to create an amazing court. And this was at a time when Edward III's court was, the king was getting older, was more drab. The French king was in prison, so we had a regent, Charles of Valois. Well, he'd sent all his damsels to the wrong place. So actually, everyone was begging, craving for charisma, for something extraordinary. And that's what the prince and princess in their heyday provided. So far, so good. It's an amazing story, but it goes wrong incredibly quickly. So that in the Middle Ages, they had this idea of the Wheel of Fortune. And it's a bit disturbing because what it says is when you're doing amazingly well, so, everything's going right, you're in love, career's going well, everyone likes you, got tons of friends. That sounds great. But the Wheel of Fortune says when it's going that well, you are moments from catastrophe, not a little blip, not a little autocorrect, but you are on the verge of absolute catastrophe. Well, that's a bit heavy, but they believed in it. And I'm afraid the Black Prince's life suddenly became the Wheel of Fortune because everything went dramatically wrong. Started at still a time of truce where he has to support one of the most unsavory characters of the Middle Ages, who is called appropriately Pedro the Cruel. Now, Pedro the Cruel, if we move from France to Spain, there are 4 kingdoms in Spain at this time. Granada is right at the bottom. That's a Muslim kingdom. Then we have Portugal, Castile and Aragon, and Navarre right at the top. In order to fight this campaign, the prince, who is this exemplar of chivalry, has to team up with 2 characters, Charles the Bad, so that's not very promising,
great start,
and Pedro the Cruel. Now, Pedro the Cruel,
winning combination,
widely suspected of murdering his wife, actually killed his half-brother in a fit of craziness halfway through a banquet and then left the body on the floor. He chased him around the banqueting hall and then dispatched him. But the worst thing of all, this is already rather worrying. The Black Prince is very pious, and he coupled martial skill and chivalrous virtue with a very deep piety. And if you go and see his tomb in Canterbury Cathedral, it's very close to where the shrine of Thomas a Becket was. Well, the last thing Pedro the Cruel, who's chucked off the throne of Castile, does before showing up in Gascony begging for help is he bumps off the Archbishop of Santiago de Compostela. This is on a par with Canterbury. This is like the murder of Becket Part 2. On consecrated ground, stabs the poor guy to death with kind of blood still dripping, shows up at the Black Prince's court. Hi, that treaty of mutual friendship and how, oops, I'm still dripping a bit of blood. So sorry. So,
treaty of mutual friendship.
Mutual friendship, yes. Well, this is where Jean Frassard comes in, because Jean Frassard starts twisting the knife. So this is where I'm setting up the myth that's going to get busted. So Jean Frassard starts with this, and he basically says, well, the prince, he was chivalrous and he'd won these victories, but basically he's a kind of 2-dimensional character. He can't rest if he's not fighting in some battle. And this is, they had quite a good word for it in the Middle Ages, which is vainglory, which is your kind of ego keeps swelling up and swelling up. So although all his advisors said, "Don't do it, mate. This isn't a good idea," the prince said, "No, I need glory. I must go." And this is a load of bollocks. So the first thing, hopefully the readers are on side with the narrative, because I now start tackling these myths in the book. But the prince is, to say he's reluctant to do this would be the understatement of the year. And finally, his father has to kind of force him to do it. And when the prince agrees to do it, he makes Pedro swear an oath that he'll totally reform his behavior. So the prince goes off, crosses the Pyrenees, wins a great victory, but it goes very wrong very quickly. He's deeply in debt. He can't pay for the expedition. His army suffers badly from dysentery. The prince himself becomes very ill the following year. And I think part of the tragedy here is, rather than being, on an ego trip of massive proportions, the prince starts thinking that these judgments, and they're going to get worse, are because he has sinned. Amongst, Pedro the Cruel's CV is pretty awesome. And he used to finish his letters not by saying "yours sincerely," but "obey or I'll cut off your head." It's like the Red Queen in Alice. He's totally bonkers. And he was excommunicated twice. Pedro the Cruel's CV is rock and roll. I think the prince started to think, God has protected me in my life. He protected me at Crécy, at the siege of Calais. The prince becomes very ill. He's protected again. The prince believes that Poitiers was a God-given victory. And now everything is going wrong. And the prince thinks it's because I helped Pedro the Cruel. So I think he's in anguish. But Jean Froissart now starts sticking the knife in right, left, and center. So once the prince becomes ill, he depicts a fallen hero, a man whose anger is out of control, who's bitter, who's rancorous. The ultimate grumpy middle-aged prince is now going to take center stage. War is resumed, and a wrathful, vengeful prince, who's now largely confined to a stretcher, goes after a town in 1370, Limoges, that was loyal to the prince in Aquitaine but has switched sides. Now, these facts are not actually correct, but read the book. Part of the town went over to the French, and not the whole of it. And if you go to Limoges now, it's got a very nice enamel industry. That rich part had always stayed loyal to the prince. But part did go over. And the prince, his brother, John of Gaunt, is basically leading the army because the prince is so unwell. But they go and besiege the town, capture it, actually on the anniversary of Poitiers on the 19th of September. And then, according to Froissart, the prince, in his fury on his stretcher, all these citizens, 3,000 men, women, and children, "Oh, prince was so sorry." And the prince says, "No, you have broken your oath. Live by the sword, you will now die by the sword." And all these poor civilians are killed in cold blood. So it's the ultimate of this build-up, really. And I've mentioned he's called the Black Prince. I just will do a little detour on that. So the first reference to the prince being called the Black Prince actually comes from John Leyland, who was an antiquarian, traveled around the country late in Henry VIII's reign. He visited the tomb, and in his notebook, he said, "The tomb of the Black Prince." That's the first time in 1542 it's mentioned. It's in print for the first time in 1570 in Richard Grafton, and Shakespeare used Richard Grafton. So in Henry V, the poor mad King Charles VI is bemoaning how nasty the English are, and he tosses in, and that prince, that Prince of Wales, the Black Prince of legend. Well, once Shakespeare has said something, we're stuck with it for the next 1,000 years. But for what it's worth, my theory is around the
As
Black
Richard
Prince.
knows.
Yeah.
I wrote a book with Philippa Langley on the discovery of Richard's remains, a great story. And then our book was used as the basis for the film, The Lost King. So yeah. So 7 years it took to find him, but he'd been in that car parking place for over 500, so I think he was just relieved to get out.
Stretch his legs.
Yeah, but going back to Shakespeare, I think the reality is that Leyland, who started this off, it was a pilgrim's nickname. When you go to the beautiful tomb, and if you visit Canterbury now, you can go down to the crypt. The crypt was originally where the Black Prince wanted to be buried, but his son, Richard II, who venerated his father, thought, no, I'm going to make it even better. And Richard II stuck the tomb as close as possible to the shrine of Thomas a Becket. This is the M1 of pilgrimage routes. Santiago de Compostela has gone out of business for a while. It's an unfortunate death of the Archbishop. But no, seriously, so Richard II was going to put the tomb there, but in the crypt you can see the achievements of the Black Prince, which have been beautifully restored. So if you haven't seen the tomb and the achievements, do have a look. It's quite amazing. But if you go to the tomb, what's very striking are the so-called badges of peace. So these are these huge shields on the base of the tomb, where you have the ostrich feather, that famously the device that the Black Prince took from the blind king of Bohemia, who fought and died very valiantly on the other side of Cressy. But the backdrop to the ostrich feather is a black shield. So I think it was a pilgrim's nickname for this. But of course, in the 19th century, the French kind of historians said, well, he must have been called Black because he did black deeds. So they kind of twinned up with Froissart, and together they created this myth of the fallen hero. So that's a little bit about his magic, his life. In his prime, he was an amazingly charismatic figure and had great and mischievous sense of humor. I think, sadly, humor is the first thing that goes when we look at these people from the past. And there was one story I'll tell you very quickly, that the prince asked Abbey of Moissac in France if they could send a monk to perform service, because he had a very melodious singing voice. So the monk took service. And then at the end, the prince went over to thank him. He was just a monk. And then said, thank you so much for conducting the service. And I'm very, very sad you have suffered so much misfortune. So many of your good friends have died. And the monk is looking quite baffled. And what do you mean? Well, I noticed, said the prince with a sly grin, that you rush through the office for the living, but the office for the dead, you seem to be there in eternity. And then the monk laughed, and they kind of, I mean, this is my imagination of the moment, but he looked at the prince and says, but as a war leader, you must know that it's those trapped in purgatory who really need our attention. And of course, the prince did know that. So through the humor, there was this bond of friendship. And the prince would always, I mean, he was quite a character. He could bring a charging horse to a halt by just raising his hand. He could bend a spear. I mean, very useful man to have in battle, I must say. So the prince, relaxing of an evening, would say, tell me the latest exploit of the monk. And this is in quite a little known French chronicle. And I say this because so much of the vitality, the presence, charisma of medieval figures vanishes, and we're left with cardboard cutouts. So that's the myth, that he becomes the fallen hero. And the reality, very, very briefly, is that and it's turning it totally on its head using a variety of document sources, is that the small part of Limoges that had been tricked, actually, they'd been told the prince had died of illness. When they found out he was well, they opened the gates of the town to the prince's army. And there were new documents and material that I used both in the narrative and in the appendix. And the result was the French garrison commander, who was well praised for the way he conducted the siege, ordered that these civilians were killed. And this is corroborated by the fact that after Limoges was captured, the French king, Charles V, dismissed the French captain, took away all his lands, and he died in poverty. So basically, Froissart was bad-mouthing the prince on a misunderstanding of the situation and got the whole story completely wrong. But it's a story, because it's so powerful, that we've followed ever since. So the myth busting is to say that the prince did become ill. He had to leave France unwell, but he remained a hero and was venerated as such. And I think the point I'd finish with on this is when he died in 1376, so a year before his father. So we're always left with this question, what kind of king might he have been? And you're very welcome to ask it. I'll do my best to answer it. When he died, the French, who'd been on the receiving end of the prince's martial power, held a solemn requiem mass for him, never before or since. And Valois chronicler says, you may find this very strange, that we are holding a solemn requiem mass for a mortal enemy who brought so much destruction on France. But the reason is he represented something much larger than that. He was a model of knighthood, a flower of chivalry to which we all aspire to. And that's why we're holding the mass. Hardly likely, I would add, if he had just massacred 3,000 French civilians in cold blood. So I think he had his failings, he had his flaws, but he was an admirable leader and wrongly besmirched by Jean Froissart and 19th century French historians.
Well, I'm just going to hop in and just say, move over William the Marshal, because there's a new history clutching down. I mean, he sounds like a legit Arthurian legend heartthrob. He is Arthur and Lancelot. He's all of them. He's Guinevere at this point. Like, he is sexy and hot. And I think I wanted to take it all the way back to him being 16 on the battlefield. And obviously I'm aware that he's been raised to be a knight and he's been raised to do this. But there is still the fact of physical development. And my understanding is that for most people, puberty happens actually a little bit later. But even today, the thought of a 16-year-old boy being able to physically match and best a man of 18 or 21, he must have been massive and really strong from quite a young age. He must have been, shall we say, an early bloomer to be able to achieve that. And I think we find it really hard to connect with these medieval fighters because we hear these stories about them telling these wonderful stories and dancing a jig at the banquet after having just cleaved a man's face into earlier in the day. And something that's always, I've heard this term, and I wonder if you've come across it, and I don't know what it means, but I find it chilling. And it's in reference to raising a boy up to be a knight, so from squire onwards. They talk about saddening the young man. And I don't know what the fuck saddening means, but it seems to be the thing that means that you're able to, like, be this brutal psychopath on the battlefield and then come home and make love to women and dance about in a carol. Like, just teach them psychological repression. Like, what is the damage there?
Yeah, sure. Of its time, the movie that, first of all, if you're looking for well-formed 16-year-olds able to do a great deal of violence, just come to Croydon Town Centre on a Saturday night.
Yeah.
but Anthony Burgess's Clockwork Orange, which kind of shocked everyone because it was about senseless killing, senseless violence. So he created the term ultra violence. I prefer Lana Del Rey's album, but let's stay with ultra violence. To my horror, I found out that Anthony Burgess, after having done The Clockwork Orange, he was now going to manifest ultra violence. His next movie was going to be The Black Prince. And he'd done a film script where the Black Prince was and his comrades in arms were robotic killing machines. And Joan of Kent was just basically, I don't care if he comes back, I don't care if he dies. And this was recently, the script was turned into a novel, which was quite favorably reviewed in War and History. So I just said a very cheeky tweet. And to their credit, War and History said, send us a rebuttal. So I did. And one of the things I said was, so much for robotic killing. When this army that had fought in Spain came back to Bordeaux, Joan of Kent was standing by the town gates holding, they had an older son, Edward of Angoulême, who died, leaving the younger one, Richard of Bordeaux, to ultimately become King Richard II. But she was standing with Edward of Angoulême. Black Prince gets off his horse. So this army, they fought a big battle, they've got across the Pyrenees. So they're thinking, well, they'll just greet each other and they get back on his horse. But no, Black Prince goes over, there's a long embrace. And then a kiss. Well, a kiss carries on for quite a while. So imagine this arm is fidgeting around. So when this kiss finally stops, the Joan and the prince hold hands, and then they bring their young son into the middle and start walking to the gate. And suddenly everyone looks around, and this entire army dismounts and processes after this love couple. So much for robotic killing. So I totally sent this thing up. And what's difficult is there's an absolute element of truth, Kat, in what you're saying, that culturally they are so different from us. So if I can give you an example again, Henry V, well, again, as Prince of Wales, he fights at Shrewsbury at about the same age as the Black Prince. And famously, he gets an arrow in the face. So he not only is fighting in the battle, but then he has surgery to extract an arrow that's 3 inches into his face without anesthetic. My hat goes, well, more than my hat goes off to these people. But that they were different in the sense that with chivalry, you were fighting for a higher cause, and bizarrely to us, that higher cause was sanctioned by God. So if you had a rightful claim, you proved that on the field of battle. And I think the most famous or now infamous example is the First Crusade, which culminates in the capture of Jerusalem, and then everyone is massacred. But that is a good thing, because we've regained Jerusalem. Now, from a modern perspective, it's very hard to get one's head around it. So I totally get where you're coming from. But in this sense, they are different. And one thing I would throw into the mix is that life expectancy is so hazardous. It's hazardous anyway, but when the Black Death wipes out between 1/3 and 1/2 of the European population, so it's the equivalent of having a nuclear war, and then it keeps coming back. So you never know when you're going to die. The 3 living and the 3 dead, these beautiful aristocrats, they're just picnicking, and then the 3 dead come up and say, yeah, can we join you? And this is the thing, it's such a heightened age where I wouldn't say it's inured to violence so much as recognizing that life and living is very transitory. And that's paradoxical for us because we are largely, not completely, but to some considerable extent, sheltered from that.
And it's part of... Sorry.
Is that helpful to some extent? I mean, it's a difficult thing.
Yeah, it definitely is. I remain curious as to the exact process of saddening a young man. How I mean, I know that they are, and what you say, it's the social environment they live in, that this is how they see men behave. But I do think it's interesting that they are at some point in their lives they are fitted with an off switch for both. And I just think that capacity to compartmentalize. Although I wonder if actually it's much different from modern day soldiers who see active duty in theatre. I think they have a capacity to compartmentalize.
Sure.
But that's been instructed by the knowledge of psychotherapy. They're doing it long before any idea about Freud is ever going to come close.
Yeah, I've worked with veterans and written about the Falklands War, got to know them very well. And I'd say, I mean, I know the veterans of the 14th and 15th century through the sources. I know these people. I'd say they struggle more because the thing was that in the 14th century, you had a belief system to support you, and it was all tied in to religion. So before and after, first thing, Black Prince is about to go on Poitiers, and he is, this is the same thing happens at Agincourt. The priests are there. At Agincourt, they actually anoint the battlefield, and we don't have that. I mean, the substitute for the Falklands War to some extent was patriotism. But when you talk to the ordinary soldiers, the Marines, the commandos, the paratroopers, the reason they were doing it was for their mates. And that is a very brittle ideology, because the way your mates will support you, and they will support you, is through alcohol and numbing out. And you meet people. I met people. I'd be talking about some battle, but then their voice would break, and I'd say, "What's happening for you?" "Well, I can't hold a job down. I'm divorced. I'm not allowed any contact with my kids." And I think, my sense is it can be no more a sense. I mean, compartmentalizing is a concept that has developed with psychoanalysis and, the Age of Enlightenment and psychoanalysis. And my sense of medieval people is they did not compartmentalize, that it was all part of a world view, for better or for worse. And the element that you're picking up is true, that people were deliberately hardened for the battlefield, but they could fit it into a context which was sanctioned by the church that we no longer really have. And that's an enormous difference. And, that sense of spiritual purpose is very powerful if it's available.
And linked to that, and something that I think we struggle with is, of course, they're being pious on earth and they have these beliefs. But part of that is a very strong belief that this isn't it, that they are going to the next place, and therefore, it is about the deeds they do on earth, but it's not going to be the end. Death isn't the end. And I think that is a really difficult concept for a lot of modern thinkers. If we don't have quite the same faith system that they do, and I wonder how much that feeds into their ability to cope, I suppose, with what, I suppose as well, if you also believe God has given you these tests and these trials, there's a sort of purpose to it. I mean,
Yes,
what happens
totally.
when we go through trauma? We're always looking for a purpose. Why has that happened? What's the silver lining? What lessons can I learn and make my life better moving forward? And I just wonder whether that's kind of more easily answered for them.
Well, a lot of trauma and a lot of modern psychoanalysis, for better or for worse, is fixated on parental-child relationships, and they were different. They they saw themselves as, certainly the aristocracy, the gentry, part of a story over generations. And you're absolutely right, where you could move up and down the family tree. And in terms of what you're saying, that this is the power of redemption. We see it in the myths of the time and also the reality that. So, for example, a heroic battle, even if you lose. I mean, I've argued elsewhere in a book on Bosworth that Richard III was taking such a risk in launching that cavalry charge and having the ceremony beforehand where the actual crown was being displayed in front of the troops, rather like Henry V, was this will either be a new beginning to my reign, or else I will die in a good way. And for medieval warriors, dying in a good way was much more important than living a long life under the stain of disgrace or dishonor. So you're absolutely right. It was, and that's why, going back to my point about the Order of the Garter, the power of intercessionary prayer, so that that most people's worry was not dying horribly, but was being stuck in purgatory. So if you suddenly thought, oh my God, this Order of the Garter, well, it's just those aristocrats. No, mate, no. They're actually praying for all of us. What, you mean me, my mates down in the pub? Yeah, if you die and you haven't confessed your sins, those guys who meet St. George's Day in Windsor, they're going to help get you up that ladder. Well, okay, that sounds good to me. You're round, by the way.
Out of Tiffany's basement.
But you get where I come. You're absolutely right. And in that sense, the sense of in life and death being part of a much broader story. See, I think our breakthroughs in terms of psychotherapy, psychoanalysis are also traps. They're both. The problem is you can get stuck with trauma, and there's a place for trauma, but in the Middle Ages, they'd understand what we'd now call mission. In other words, the power of aligning yourself to a higher purpose. Hence, the Grail story. So we have Arthur's court. It's winter. Everything's going wrong. He doesn't say, right, guys, I brought a shrink in, and we're going to basically all look at our mum and dad issues for the next 5 years. Doesn't do that. Instead, let's go and find the Grail. Align ourselves to a higher purpose.
Yes.
Whereas we navel gaze at trauma, and up to a point, there's real value in it. But when you are totally immersed in your trauma, you tend to keep repeating it. So I think we have things that we could offer them that would help them, but vice versa as well. And I think in some respects, in terms of mental health, they were better adjusted than we were. That's my own view.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, the courts are just I think it's the other myth, of course, is the age-old myth of this period being known as the Dark Ages. When, of course, as we know, it's this period of art and music and storytelling and vibrant colours everywhere.
Vibrant,
just if you, I mean, I spend a bit of time in Dover Castle. I'm going to be spending a lot of time in Dover Castle. And the way
fascinating,
it's brilliant. And the way they've kind of researched that and done it, everyone kind of comes in and goes, particularly when we have American friends, they say, why is it all of these colours? I'm like, because this is what the past actually looked like, and there'd be troubadours and jesters and famous people whose party trick was a whistle, a skip, and a fart. Like you could be living as a farter. That could be a job. And they this
farting was very important. There is a spoof chivalric romance called the Song of Ordigier, which, I mean, Edward I had a copy, and it's basically total excrement, farting, and they loved it. But then when his army, Edward I, they were in real trouble at Falkirk, Edward made this great comment, because clearly everyone knew about this, the farting side of chivalry. He said, look at those Scots. They may seem quite frightening, but remember, they are sons of Ordigier. And everyone thought that was hilarious. So absolutely, I mean, this is the vitality of that period, where it's that vibrancy that also gives leadership, but also lifestyle, that extraordinary power. Whereas I think to some extent, we can project onto that our own, I mean, obviously, we are to some extent sheltered from disease in the way that they weren't. I mean, if I have a toothache, I can go to the dentist. They just had to suffer. There's so many good things. But when you embrace a life and a lifestyle, and you have the support of your community, whether it's a monastery or a village, and you have a sense of being part of something, you bypass the profound social alienation that so many people suffer from now, and leads to a lot of mental illness.
I like that you brought up humour. I mean, I suppose that was the farting and the shitting and all that is very humorous as well. But the that story with Joan, the Black Prince and Joan, like basically having a laugh at a banquet. I mean, it's so modern. It is. It does it. That beyond anything else brings them into focus as real people. I think that was so incredible. And you're right. It's the first thing that we lose, because it's sort of. How would you write that down? Why would it be? That was probably written down because it was strategic, and it got.
Well, this is you have to work a bit with the sources. I mean, obviously, I didn't make it up, but Froissart said something like, Gaston Phoebus regaled the audience with these stories, and then Joan of Kent leaned towards him. Well, I was aware, and I'd gone off and trawled in the sources, so I knew what clothes Joan wore, and I went into costume history. So basically, if Joan leans forward, I put two and two together, but other people would go, Joan leans forward, they're like, boring. So this whole marvelous moment just wasn't there. And what I say, about the past is, you need your source material, but sometimes you have to work. And part of that work is just using imagination. And it's using that imagination in conjunction with source material that allows these things to come back and be alive. And I think that the vibrancy, to use your word, Kat, because it's a lovely word, that's the key. That this was such a vibrant age, and these vignettes, these moments, because everyone at the banquet would have felt part of that moment.
Yeah.
When Phoebus was laughing, the princess was laughing, the prince was beaming, and everyone would just look around, raise their glasses, and thought, rock and roll, this is good.
Yeah.
And when this goes out of the window, we're missing the raison d'etre, really, and replacing it by a rather bland narrative. The bland narrative, this magnificent court, there are a lot of tournaments and a lot of banquets, and yawn. I mean, I'm not feeling like, wow, I want to be there. But
we make them very serious, don't we? We make them very serious in our mind.
Serious, quite leaden. Yes, quite leaden.
History is serious work for big
It is
grown-ups.
very serious business.
Absolutely. Of course. Very serious.
No one talks about this. Then you told a story about Joan with a little twinkle in her eye, essentially with a dress that shows the blush at the top of her nipples, leaning over in such a way. And perhaps, you get that kind of thought of, is she maybe pushing them together ever so slightly? The way that happened in EastEnders. Like, is she kind of... It becomes almost like Mob Wives. Like, we have that modern context. And being in that room and watching it happen when you're, I don't know, 3 or 4 heavy duty meads in or whatever, there's a crackle in the atmosphere. It's flirtation, it's silliness, it's also poking fun, and then that
absolutely, it's it's knowing how far to go and it's knowing where to stop. But it's slightly,
Titillating.
turning the social mores around.
Yeah.
There's another. I mean, there was an arbitration dispute, so a lot of Breton knights came to the prince's court, and there was one very grumpy Breton knight, and his wife was very frumpy, so grumpy and frumpy, and most of the knights on both sides found this couple a pain in the arse. Now, at this stage, the Princess of Wales was already, everyone was copying her, so what they decided to have a bit of fun. So one courtier said to Grumpy, so is your wife planning to copy the dress sense of the Princess of Wales? And the guy went, outrageous woman, never will my wife dress in such a wanton fashion. So there was a pause for a while. And then the courtier said, perhaps considering your wife, that is just as well.
Yeah.
And that's going right to the edge. I mean, you could get a duel or something, but
you could get stabbed for that.
with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the thing is when we hear people talk about the game of courtly love, it sounds, like petty fours at dawn. But actually, the game of courtly love also involves a bit of cleave and some smutty innuendo.
You got it.
Did they have jesters at this point?
Oh, yes, definitely. Jesters and troubadours. All the whole works. So, yes. Yeah, definitely. And there was quite a bit of discussion about after-meal entertainment. So, they like the rowdy, people doing acrobatics and buffoonery. But also there was a kind of hunger for poetry, for storytelling that could actually transport you as well. So that they had a lot of entertainers, and they gave quite a lot of thought to entertaining and what was being, the way it was being done. And again, it's just part of that, the fullness of the day, that you want storytelling. Because, of course, now storytelling is to some extent a lost art, because we've got so much social media. But of course, the magnificent History After Dark shows the value of that. But they had to entertain themselves with storytelling, with the jesters. And I think a lot of these entertainments were pretty astonishing, that they made people laugh, but they also conveyed a deeper meaning as well.
How do we see him portrayed in fiction?
Oh,
how
do we see him portrayed in fiction?
So there's a film, A Knight's Tale, which the Black Prince appears. James Purefoy portrays him. A Knight's Tale I actually really like, because it doesn't take itself too seriously. So it starts with a joust, and you have Queen, we will rock you. But actually, if you read Henry of Grosmont's Book of Holy Medicine, which is more like a book of holy smut, where he's boasting about all-night drinking parties, whoring, and he goes into quite a lot of detail. I mean, Book of Holy Medicine, you think, give that a miss. Don't, please do not, because it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, basically, with a bit of the sacred right at the end. But you realize that if you said to your wife, I'm just going off on a round of tournaments, she'd be pretty worried, because it was like a rock tour, basically. There were lots of groupies there. And Henry of Grosmont said, because at this stage the garter was an item of male attire, he'd say, I'd ride in and I'd just show off a bit of leg to all the, the women of, bad behavior. And again, this whole atmosphere is brought out very well in A Knight's Tale. And then the Black Prince makes a cameo appearance, and I have to say, I just thought that's bang on. James Purefoy does it beautifully. So of course, back in the day, Errol Flynn was chancing his arm just about everything. But I'm going to say that A Knight's Tale is a portrayal that I particularly like because it does not take itself too seriously, and by doing that, it actually works.
Yeah. That's true. Of course, the gentleman's calves. It's easy to forget that for a long period of time, men's calves were the tits of the age.
A good pair of calves nowadays, to be fair.
But you
Following
don't
them
tend to find men stuffing the back of their socks with horsehair filled pads like a push-up bra. Like you don't tend to find a wonder bra for the calf, but that exists.
Kat,
Really.
I'm so pleased, Kat, you've come into your own, because the nipple clamps and electric shocks were such a tease, but now you're in flow and it's wonderful. I'm very happy to give you a short reading list where you could follow up on this, but do not miss the Book of Holy Medicine, which I'm going to rename
and her medieval basements.
The Book of Smuts.
Yes. And there are also some really good books of like medieval comic tales. There are some incredible. They do enjoy a lot of farting,
yes,
and a lot of shit. Like the scatology is it's intense.
Someone actually did. I mean, this is wonderful. If in some of these American universities, in particular, someone did a thesis studying medieval shit on campaign. I mean, what a opening line at a party. You know, you're doing a thesis
at the moment.
But it's full of fascinating things. Like, for example, you can have a siege where the stink, because you've got the horse shit as well, gets so intense that even for the medieval nose, you'd rather surrender. So, and apparently, I mean, I'm going to bring this out in my latest book, which is on the fall of France, but apparently in this, when the English were holding out in Rouen right at the end of the 100 Years' War, the smell got so bad that even hardened campaigners said, "I've had enough."
Wow.
So, and this is because so many refugees, and we underestimate horse shit. So please keep horse shit on the map. So if you have mass thousands of horses, you are really going to have a shit palace, and you've got to be prepared to deal with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, imagine doing your thesis on medieval shit and warfare.
Do you know, here's the thing, though. We're talking about how upset people are with
the thing,
right?
Yeah.
But let's be very. I do a lot of work in costume, and I have done for a number of years. And there are three main topics of question that you get in costume about how people lived in the past. What do they eat? Fucking is a big one. They want to know all about fucking. And the other thing they want to know about is, how do they go to the toilet? Where do they go to the toilet? I tell you the thing they love: a woman in Georgian mantua dress. When you tell them about their little pissy gravy boat, they love a pissy gravy boat. They love it. So we've not changed. We still love excrement and sex and food. We're so venial. And that has not changed down the centuries. We think we're better, but we would also laugh at Roland the Farter today.
we would. You're so right. Just like they did. Just like they did. Give us a few minutes, give us a few drinks, and we'd all be roaring at the same things. That's kind of refreshing, isn't it?
Yeah. There is a call for a reading list on Substack.
Well,
Horror. We might have to put it together.
We'll have to put it together.
A book club. There you go. Michael Jones Book Club on HAD.
The historical filth texts.
Yeah, you've got to start with the Book of Holy Medicine. If you can get a hold of that, a guide to whoring, and quite a lot of detail on fucking and fucking different kinds of women and what they smelt like, and I was thinking, when are we going to get on to the Holy Medicine, and then of course drinking. So it seems that some of these campaign vows were sort of made after everyone was on the verge of passing out. So yeah, and that's where I'd start. That would be my contribution. The book of holy medicine.
Yeah.
You'd never have thought of that, would you?
You know,
never have thought of that.
Everyone is Googling this now, whether it's wise or unwise.
You must Google the Book of Holy Medicine, because if you're on the train reading the Book of Holy Medicine, you're totally safe. No one's going to bother you. No one's going to say outrageous. They're going to say how wonderful. You know, bless you.
How learned.
Bless you on your life journey, and you'll just smile and turn the page to more whoring and drinking. So you can see how
from their pearls, you could read them an extract and tip them over the edge.
Yeah,
you've got it.
Which way you wanted to go? Oh dear.
So there we go.
So that's on everyone's reading list now. So
I'm going on holiday tomorrow, and I'm now thinking, I wonder if I can download that. Read it by the pool.
I think you might be able to download at least some of it. Yeah.
Right. I need time after this to get that
sorted. There's probably a copy of like Internet Archive or something. There's got to
be. Yes, definitely. Well, right. I think I've got to win if I've even half persuaded Philippa to take the Book of Holy Medicine with her on a holiday in Cyprus. I mean, yeah, I think Henry of Grosmont would have been delighted. Yeah.
I'm going to Disney Paris. I'm not sure it's Disney Paris reading material, is it?
Don't read it aloud, babe. Read it in your head.
No. I can't take. Mind you, I take myself in there, so I can't take anything depraved in there. But I do take myself.
I'm going to find time to. I'm going to be sitting by a pool. You're going to be in Disneyland. You're not supposed to be like sitting reading a book in Disneyland.
No, but just if you're having 5 minutes taking the atmosphere, or on the ferry, or in the car.
You're not going to get 5 minutes. You've got kids. What on earth are you on about?
I once was doing.
Me, I will bin them for a bit. I often do stuff on my own.
I was doing a tour once, and I was building up the narrative. This was a battle of Beaujais, a battle where the English got beaten, and I'd been there a few years ago, and it seemed very straightforward. And I got the map, and so basically I was building up the narrative. And you come out of a forest, and you see the river and the old town of Beaujais on the hill. So this mad dash that the English did to fight the battle, I was getting everyone in the mood. But since I'd been last, they'd set up a little Disney theme. So we swung out of the forest, and there was this huge Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck greeting us. Hi guys, can we join your battle?
That is nightmare fuel.
That's not the Disney I'm going to. I'm just like
I've changed.
Wow, it's been a while. It's not been that long. Well.
Okay.
I have learned so much.
It's been wonderful. Yes. Thank you so much. It's been brilliant.
It's been great fun.
Been loads of loads of comments coming up in the side. People have really, really enjoyed it. I think you've definitely inspired a new book club. So yes, actually, we'll come back to that. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've seen lots of people coming in.
Can you remind us of the title of your book?
Yes.
On the Black Prince, please.
Yeah. So the book's called Michael Jones, and it's called The Black Prince. And I'm giving, for those of you who can get to Southwark Cathedral, I think the bishop has changed, but
I hope so.
Southwark Cathedral, I'm giving a talk on the Black Prince on Friday week. So that's the 18th of July. We're kicking off the Southwark History Festival. So it's at 10 o'clock in the library. So if you're interested, do come or do read the book. I hope you'll really enjoy it, because it was a privilege being able to write about his life, and also trying to bring him back as a human being rather than just a cardboard cutout.
Rather than just the king that there wasn't, or the king that wasn't. Yeah.
Exactly.
got this off my shelf as well. Look, you mentioned
yes.
this earlier.
The Lost King, the book I wrote with Philippa. Yeah, that's that inspired the movie. It's originally called The King's Grave. Yeah, Philippa Langley. Yeah.
Right. So, Michael, just quickly as well before we round up, where can people find you?
So I have a website. So it's all lowercase, michaeljoneshistorian.com. So you can contact me there, info@michaeljoneshistorian.com. So that's how I can be found for my sins. So yes, if you want to get in touch, please. michaeljoneshistorian.com. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, Philippa, what's happening next week?
Well, next week, nothing, because so I was looking. We have the next episode is the 23rd of July. Don't ask me why.
I don't know what's happening. Okay.
But anyway, so there will be an episode out, unless I've got that wrong. That was what was on our spreadsheet. But the next episode, we are discussing the myth around Thomas Boleyn pimped out his daughters. So that's the myth we're looking at next time, and we'll post beforehand, so you'll know when it's going out.
Yes, just have an idea, but I'll tell you about that in a minute. Tell us about all the other things.
Right, let's do this. So, like this video, share it with your pals. If you like the channel, subscribe, hit the bell icon, select all. You'll be updated when we're uploading. Also, tell your mates about this channel, because let's be honest, if you're here, you've got at least one disgusting friend who should also be. Because otherwise you'd be so lonely in your filth and a reprobate nature. If you have enjoyed what you've seen tonight, you can tell us with money. If you go to www.buymeacoffee.com/had podcast, you can purchase Winnebagos, but you can also join our close friends. That's on Instagram. If your had logo on Instagram, the circle has a green light around it that means you're part of our close friends, and Catherine has found something utterly vile online to share with you. And thus, you can see what our group chat is like. So you can join our close friends. It's also, please do follow our Instagram, because we do post, because YouTube is a sneaky mistress and doesn't always see what we've uploaded. So Instagram's a good place to be. Also, we've got a Substack, historyafterdarkhub.substack.com. That is a place to find out what we're up to. It is also a place to purchase our merch. We've got Warboner merch. We've got History After Dark merch. We've got Timmy's a Problem merch. No Feet for Free on the internet merch. And also, excitingly, as well as our other existing merch, we finally have our conflict resolution merch. Run, do not walk, to purchase your conflict resolution merch. That is there, linked to the Substack. Also, you can listen to this as a podcast. Now, obviously, at podcast places, you can't subscribe and like. What you can do is give 5 stars and a review. So if you think we're worth 5 stars and a glowing review, please do so. If you think we're not worth 5 stars, shh. Just go away. Sometimes thoughts can be inside thoughts. Take it elsewhere.
No one cares.
Please also make sure that you follow our individual social media. We will leave links to our stuff and to Michael's stuff as well. Click all of the links. Thanks.
Yes, please.
Anything else? Is that it?
I'm going to upload all the new merch stuff onto Substack tomorrow. So if you want to see it, you got to get down and sign up to our Substack.
Sign up to Substack. Amazing.
Yeah.
So then, friends, I know that we are all incredibly grateful to Michael. We're going to let him leave. He's told us amazing things, and he's been a great sport. So we're going to, I'm going to tell you all to be good. And if you can't be good, be careful. And if you can't be careful, for the love of all that is holy, do not get caught. We're going to go in 3, 2, 1. Bye.
Cool.